This is the industrial side. Most industrial businesses are either won or lost in the day-to-day operations. These are conversations with the operators who run these firms, talking about how they run them, what works, and what doesn't.
Jessica Stahl, how you doing?
Hey, Brian. Good to be with you.
Long time no see. How are things in Fort Lauderdale?
Good. Warm.
Warm. Okay. I just escaped New Orleans to Cleveland, so I'm reevaluating what warm means to me.
I bet you are. I've lived through Maine winters, so I feel like I can handle anything now.
There you go. Resiliency. So to give you a little bit more background, I know you're the COO of Metric Marine. Metric Marine, this is kind of like the third part of our three-part series. I had Thomas, CEO, Josh, the director of marketing, and now I have you for operations. This is the one I'm actually more excited for because I think part of the purpose of this podcast is to talk about like individual operational issues and how that can lead into the success or failure of a business. And so some of the episodes have been a little bit more focused on a little bit higher level picture, and I want to go a little bit deeper individual now today. If you're willing to take this journey with me. Cool. So for anyone who's not listened before, we've talked about Metric Marine a little bit, but to give it the high level, I say you're a marine supply distributor, right? So you provide marine parts and different supplies to cruise lines, like the big cruise lines, Princess, Royal Caribbean, all the ones that people have never heard of, Disney.
All the big guys.
Yeah. They're sending you bulk orders quarterly or monthly or whatever it is, and you are looking internationally to find the parts that they need to provide them. Would you say that's correct?
Yes, that's fair. Yes, that's very accurate. So yes, anytime the ships require any type of technical consumable, those RFQs get forwarded off to their procurement departments, and then their procurement departments obviously source and find vendors like Metric Marine, and we look to help them and be an extension of their procurement team.
So I guess the first question, because this seems like it'd be way more complicated than a lot of maybe more mom and pop distributors where maybe there's 4, 5, 6, let's go to 10 maybe manufacturers that a distributor is representing. I mean, you're dealing with the biggest brands in the world. How many manufacturers are you dealing with on a daily basis?
Hundreds. I mean, as you mentioned, there's the big top cruise lines, and every year they're rolling out a new ship, right, with new equipment, new gear, different initiatives, environmental initiatives, etc. around the world, and with that comes new brands and items and technical specs that keep expanding our catalog daily. So we look to add those particular brands to our catalogs that are in need and help the vessels maintain their stock levels and requests for those items.
So my understanding is that you get a request for quote from these different, I guess you have maybe I'll call it 15, 20 main cruise lines that are sending you kind of the big ticket items. These are all the different bulk items we need. What happens after you receive that?
We get to work. No, so a lot of what we do on the daily, there's a lot of items that are repeat items that these cruise lines request from us. And to your point there, some of them, are higher spend consumables that we can anticipate and we stock here in South Florida, and then there's the other items that they're requesting that are a little bit harder for them to find. So when they come in through our integration, I think Thomas spoke to a little bit in his episode, but for those out there, we operate on platforms like ShipServe, or we have API integrations with customers' ERPs, where now these RFQs flow right into our own ERP and are mapping to our part numbers and catalog items. But there is a good percentage of items that maybe are not in our catalog. So our team reviews those items, those technical specifications, and relies heavily on some of the data that we have within our ERP. We have hundreds of vendors that we work with, and on particular brands, categories, etc. We rely on those vendors to provide us pricing availability, and our inside sales team reviews those. And just as what the cruise lines are doing to us, we're doing with our vendors. A lot of times with particular items, we have, first, second, third tier vendors behind each item. And depending on the needs of the vessel and timing is who we kind of go with to get those items. So once we have the pricing and availability, we provide those specs back to the cruise lines and await our purchase order.
And I assume because of the cash conversion cycle, you can't just buy 1,000 items from your suppliers well before the order. Yep, you kind of have to in some ways be just in time. You get an order in, and then you put an order into your other
Yes.
is that the way it's been working?
Yeah, and that's a little bit, so that's why, our bread and butter is our catalog items, but then we, become an extension of these procurement departments in a sense when we are trying to help them with those specialty items that they need help sourcing that we may not have on our shelves, and our vendors may or may not have them on their shelves as well. So, we've got a large majority of our orders, when we're quoting something, we normally get the orders back within, 7 to 10 business days. There are those special circumstances where we might quote something and we don't get the PO for, 2 months, right? And at that point in time, right, everyone can assume the, availability and possibly the price, especially in this world that we're living in today, has changed. So yeah, there's a little bit of hedging on that, a little bit of nurturing our relationships with our vendors. We're constantly looking at these items as they come in. Is this, we have a catalog manager now that is reviewing those high demand, non-stock catalog items that maybe we should consider stocking, or creating better relationships with those distributors so that we can hedge and, make our lives easier when that order comes in and have that item readily available. So yeah, it's a little bit give and take. And, you add the layer of complexity in the maritime industry where, a vessel itinerary can change, needs can change. Certainly, crew and their expectations of what the item coming on board is to be like. You've got a lot of different variants playing into the fulfillment process.
So I'm sure it varies, but like when someone puts in an RFQ, what's their expectation, like generally, about when the item should be right there on board? Like,
well, that can vary depending on the customer. I won't, go in but no, I think, the expectation is when RFQ comes in, in our industry, speed and price is the biggest two factors in taking that RFQ and getting it into an order from our end customers, right? So, that means on our side, we need to have the data available for our inside sales team and Jason and whatnot to make the most informed decision and provide that feedback to our customers. So yeah, when we're getting these RFQs, we're trying to, one, get them turned around in adequate time, because we know, the first to in is high anticipation to get the order. And then also the pricing, the availability obviously matters as well, right? Depending on vessel movement or where they're asking for the item to be delivered. A lot of these cruise lines, we're working with their logistics companies and consolidating with them. But that is where Metric adds our value add to our end users as well, is that we do consolidate a lot of products. So, you could be asking for paint rollers and, power tools and some plywood and beams. And we can consolidate that all into one order for our end customers and provide that value add, back. So yeah, it's a bit of a loaded gun when we're getting those RFQs and how we handle them.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And like I assume that you have such a large customer base that you're receiving a lot of RFQs. Like how many RFQs would you say you get every month?
Well, in a month, I was going to go daily. On a month, it depends, peak season. We primarily deal a lot with the cruise industry, and being in South Florida, like we get very busy in the winter months when a lot of the vessels are here before they're migrating back to Europe for the summer. So it can range from month to month, but anywhere from, 1,500 to 2,500 quotes a month. So our RFQs from in and out, and that encompasses as well outside of cruise, merchant customers and B2C, but yeah, and then it can spike up to close to 3,000 depending on peak season. So it's a lot on the daily, and we work with our inside sales team to maintain a relatively consistent return time, especially again for those items that are our catalog items. And with our integrations now, it allows us to be able to return those RFQs within the hour. So that has been a great value add to our customers as well. And yeah.
So you mentioned speed and price are kind of like the things that most of your customers are basically making their decisions on. But then with this vendor or you, I would imagine as a capitalist, you'd probably rather just be faster than be cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. That is, yeah. No, speed is something we can have control over. Sometimes price we don't have control over. We can try our best to maintain relationships with our vendors and hedge on tariffs, etc. But yeah, in this world, yeah, less control over that sometimes.
So what are the challenges with like being able to respond to an RFQ, let's say you said within an hour, maybe within 2 hours? What's the challenge of being able to receive that and respond back with estimated pricing and timeline in a few hours?
Well, like I said, Technology is not always perfect, right? It's there to make our lives easier. It's not, to replace humans. So there's a little bit of like there's a couple layers to this, right? When the RFQ comes in, it's getting matched to a part number. We need to make sure that it matched to the correct part number, right? Data is only as good as we maintain it, right? And the data on our customer sides as well. And you can speak with any of the cruise lines, I'm sure any of them that would be listening would say the same. Like a lot of the information that are on RFQs, sometimes you really have to have that person behind the scenes reading it and understanding what they are asking for, because you could have a reference number to a completely different description on the line itself. So you really have to double and triple check these items, and then vendor relationships and that pricing and availability information is really important. One of the things that these operators are looking for, and they stay with us, is the consistency side of it. As far as being that fact checker and when they ask for something, they're getting what they receive on board. So when we're quoting, we try to be as close as possible, if not on the exact item that they are asking for. In the consumable world, there's a lot of alternatives that you can, offer to help save on price and give a faster turnaround time and availability. And most times than not, these cruise lines they don't care what the brand of the paint roller is, as long as it's fitting the specs and the sizes and the application in which they're looking to use it for. Another part of the feature of the value add that we add there is understanding, what these are going to be used for. So there's that. And you can, there we can get away with offering, what we have on our shelves. But when it comes to a particular power tool or, piece of, metal or whatnot, when it's so specific, you have to understand what those details are, and you can't make substitutions. So you have to be very careful in that. And again, that's where we have that value add.
Yeah. No, that's it. That's interesting. I mean, like it definitely sounds like there's a lot of bespoke things happening. Someone puts in kind of like maybe their requirements, maybe there's specific brands in there, and maybe you could look outside those brands. Maybe you just are just looking internationally. What is the cheapest, fastest way to get them what they need so they can get their ship ready? But just and talking to you before and just kind of knowing a little bit about Metric, it seems like there's some companies that are looking a little bit more of a more self-service model, almost more closer to Amazon with the punch out model, where they can just browse what they're looking for and just order it without talking to anybody. How's that been?
Well, that's an interesting storyline for Metric. Punch out has been something that has been in the background. It's coming more to the forefront here in the past few years. I think early on when I joined Metric, it was a buzzword. We weren't really set up to support it, but for those listeners who don't, have heard of Punch out, Punch out is an e-procurement model where a vessel can go and shop the item in a vendor's catalog and then order it directly from the site. And then it feeds the PO back through their internal system, kind of bypassing the procurement team's sourcing role. So, and previously, we had a particular customer that went this route. And at the time, Metric wasn't prepared for that, to be able to jump into that system. So, I actually was visiting them, a few years back and, asking the procurement team, meeting with them and seeing what their day-to-day looked like and how, life outside Punch Out was working, and kind of speaking to the idea that, Metric was at a point now where we were ready to prepare, ourselves for the technology aspect of Punch Out. And I can remember her, telling me about an RFQ that came up for her for a vessel. And she went to go to the typical vendor to, quote this and get a quote for it. And they kind of rejected her. They rejected her saying, we refuse to quote this, this item is on Punch Out, like go back to the vessel. And here she was kind of like stuck, right? She had no power to change the RFQ. The ship had released it to her, and she was in a difficult spot where she needed to place it. And it should have gone through Punch Out, but sure, it landed on her desk. So her plea to me, when we were talking about Metric joining it, she's like, that's great, but, just don't forget to have your customer service aspect, that was really important, right? Like, and that really sat with me, as we're preparing ourselves to be on Punch Out, there's also the side of keeping that customer service aspect that we've always hung our hat on here at Metric, where we add value to our customers and understanding the marine background and the needs. While technology is great in many respects, it's also keeping that human aspect to it, as far as like that review process that we were just going in detail about our inside sales team and supporting the procurement team on a daily. So that was something that really sat with me, So now how Metrics kind of operationalize that, those type of RFQs, when they come across our desk, if they are on our punch out, which by the way, Metric is on punch out today. We have an Amazon storefront. We're connected with one of our larger cruise customers, and we're getting our feet on the ground with that and educating them more. And that particular customer who we had lost business with, where we weren't originally ready to be a part of punch out, we are now on punch out and regaining back our business that we had previously lost. So, and we are still quoting the procurement team when they send the RFQs our way. But, I think there's a lot of work to be done on that. But for us on our side, things like punch out and these integrations are great for us because it helps us forecast demand a little bit better, helps with pricing initiatives and bulk buys for these cruise customers. I mean, you think of it in a way of, your day-to-day life, the Amazon products that you have delivered to you at your house. I was joking with you before, my daughter's 2 is still more in the diaper phase, right? Like I hop right on Amazon, it's there the next day, right? On these cruise ships, right? Like certain things like rags or, tools and whatnot, they can go on and order it themselves, these vessels. But when it comes to more of the, strategic buys and more particular items, right, that still involves a procurement process, especially when it comes to high dollar items. So we kind of fit somewhere in the middle. So we're prepared to support both the punch out and the procurement process. So, that's a little bit of where we're at with the punch out process here at Metric.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like the punch out, when you talked about like the component of it's like speed and price, the punch out serves to like speed things up significantly. Yeah. But there's almost like a third quadrant of like just accuracy based on like what you guys do when you get an RFQ, and that punch out almost challenges that part a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in this world, technical consumables, they're time sensitive, and it's a high touch point for these cruise lines. But in the end, we're dealing with customers who are the real technical experts. These chief engineers on board know better than anyone what they need and what they want. So punch out really allows them to be able to go online and shop for those items, especially ones that, they don't need a second or third pair of eyes over it. The procurement team or the ship managers are going to approve it one either way, right? Again, for them, like the cloth rags even, or the gauges or whatnot, like not a high spend item, not something that you need to be spending administrative time and brain power on, right? Like those are items that they know themselves what they're looking for. They know it better than anyone else. It's locked in at a price. They can see the availability. They can press a button and it goes right through the order process. And for us, it's a win because it allows our team to not have to deal with quoting that same item over and over again, right, at the same price. It just goes directly to PO. And that allows our team then to focus on the true quotations that need that human interaction with, right, that needs to be looked at and reviewed with our vendors, and maybe it's not on our shelves. So it's a win-win for both sides.
Yeah. And so like whether it's punch out seems a little bit more self-serve or an RFQ, once kind of like the sale is made, what's the handoff look like to the operational team that's to make sure the parts are there?
Yeah, so that's that can be the make or break point, right? It gets thrown over the fence, so to speak, in some companies, but operations really is an extension of our customer service. So, and it can make or break you, right? Like, so when we make a commitment to an item at a price and an availability, like we need to do our best and utmost job to get that there on time. These ships are shifting itineraries. They're in different ports and cities. They cross the, oceans over to Europe in the summer. So having accuracy and on-time delivery is very important in the world that we live in. So when an order comes in, right, fulfillment begins. And a lot of times what we're trying to do now, and it's a work in progress, like with everything, and with implementing technology where it can help us with some of our forecast demanding on inventory, we do our best to fulfill those items via our stock and then have those relationships with our vendors where when the order gets in, we have those orders released right away to our vendors and get those items fulfilled in our warehouse. And going back to my earlier comment, a goal of ours is always to be, shipping consolidated shipments, one shipment, but we do allow also for partial shipments to make those deadlines for our customers when needed. So Maintaining those vendor relationships again. So sometimes we quote something and we may not get the order for even a few weeks. And again, the availability and the price and whatnot can change in that time frame. So we have to do a good job on our side for planning on that and building that buffer space and value into when we're making those decisions at the quoting process. So yeah, it's a never-ending battle, right? With implementing technology that can help us be better at that. But we have a great purchasing team here and a warehouse team that understands the market that we're in and the urgency behind fulfilling those orders on time. So it's, like I said, it's a balancing act every day.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, like you've mentioned the word relationships a lot, but it almost seems like in your particular industry, like either you were fast enough and the price is value enough or not. Like, I guess it's hard. I mean, you have a good personality, but I wonder how many customers you can keep on that alone. I mean, it seems like just the results is kind of the operations is kind of what drives the whole thing.
No, really, like I said, I keep hammering it. It's make or break, line by line, vessel by vessel. And in our industry, it's really interesting, and I think we're speaking to it earlier, is that these big cruise lines, right? Like you've got we can name them, like Carnival Corporation, Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. They have fleets of 30 plus vessels, right? And each vessel in itself is a customer to us, right? And even within each vessel, right, they are changing crew and staff every 6 months, right? So, maintaining those relationships is a big task to do. And that's where that consistency aspect comes into play, is being consistent with what we're providing to our customers, right? Like it's a high touch point. Like it's not just charm. They stay with us because of consistency, right? And a lot goes into making those relationships, and a lot of decisions oftentimes by the procurement when they're buying these items is based off historical data and being in their systems, right? And the way you stay in their systems, right, is again through consistency. So, but I know you spoke with Josh, right? Like we are doing a lot in the way of educating our customers too. So operations is also working closely with marketing and outside sales, right? Setting those expectations, educating our customers. One of the biggest things that we often joke about is when we get in front of new customers, we're like, to win their business, we're like, yeah, we can get anything, we can source that for you. Like just send it our way and we can review it, because we do act as an extension of these procurement teams, but at the same time, we really want to sell what's in our catalog, right? That helps us, right? That helps. That would be better, right? We want to get the stuff off our shelves, but to get someone into the door, you're almost out there, and I can hear Jason now. It's like, well, we need to really educate them on what's in our catalog, which a lot of what we're doing now. Metric in the old days didn't have anyone, sending out emails regarding, educating people on our catalog and what we're doing on Punch Out and all these great things. Now we do have a great team that's in place that's educating. And what we're doing now is looking at the data of like, okay, here's our biggest customer. They're buying all this out of our catalog, right? And then, okay, here's another great customer, but they're only buying like 20% out of our catalog. Like, how do we educate them on this other percentage of what this other company is buying, right? And so we do targeting marketing to educate them. I can't tell you how many times, I have pretty decent relationships with our top customers, and we go in and we'll be meeting with the buyers, and they'll be like, oh, I didn't know you sold plywood, or I didn't know you guys had that brand, or you can help us with getting better pricing than the Grangers or McMasters. It's like, that's our bread and butter. You didn't know that we've been doing business for 30 years, right? Like, and you just can't make those assumptions that everybody knows that within these companies. So it's constant education. It's constantly making sure we're filling those gaps for them. Their teams change, right? Just as much as, sometimes ours do, unfortunately. And like, you just have to stay on top of that and building those relationships and having that human interaction, but also layering it with, these great opportunities we have now through digital marketing and listening to our customers, right? I think one of the best angles that we play is always, okay, what are you having a hard time sourcing? Like, what is your pain point? What brand are you, because all these vessels are built over in Europe. So they're built with, 220 volts, needing 220 volts, right? They have a lot of European vendors because they're built in Europe. So a lot of when they come to the States, right, it's hard for them to find some of these replacement parts and items that they need. So what we've been doing is listening to them when they have those pain points on certain brands, We then take it upon ourselves to go directly to these manufacturers and brands and say, hey, we're Metric Marine. We're in South Florida. You've got customers sailing out of these ports right in our backyard. They're asking for these products. What can we do to get them on our shelves? Can you give us a list of items? Can we work together on getting them available in the States so that we can fill this gap when the ships are sailing over here? And we've had some pretty good success stories on that. And, that's what's driving, helps us to bring more new customers in while also maintaining our current customers. And then again, adding that layer of like, okay, they come to us for this, MAP product, but then they go and they say, oh, they got the paint supplies, the PPE, and then they throw that in their cart, right? And so then you're creating a full experience for our customers. And, so as much as educating them, it's also educating ourselves on where they have those pain points and where we can fill in the gaps and, build that consistency and be that right hand to them.
And the tension probably is, I assume companies of this size, they can't give you they can't make you their sole supplier of everything, right? They're probably trying to diversify, but like when they're in a pinch, when they need something, when there's an emergency, when time is of the essence and they're already ordering other stuff from you, the more that they could actually add on to that could actually be beneficial to them. Like in the short term, or when it matters, not necessarily like at their whole sourcing strategy, but I'm sure there's a lot of times where because I'm just imagining from this is a consumer facing business. There's not really a lot of leeway given when you spend all your vacation money on a Disney cruise and there's some sort of issue with the boat. And you can't see Mickey dance on the water. So
yeah, no, exactly. So it's funny, right? Because I think Josh touched on it in her episode with you about it's not necessarily sexy what we're always selling at Metric Marine, but when you put in terms of okay, MAPE flooring was, it needed to be delivered to the port to fulfill the project where they are fixing a flooring that may have Mickey dancing on it later on in the day. That's important. It's a high touch point. It's high pressure for them. So you put in perspective of what even the smallest item can be to a project on board a vessel. And then to them, what they're selling is an experience to their consumers. So you don't want to be the person that didn't get the elevator part there on time. And then the elevator is down. And then that person's core memory of their experience on board the ship is well, the elevator was down. I had to walk 3 flights of stairs, I started my career early on on the other side of the table, right? I started in a shipyard. I worked for a cruise line. That's how I got down to Florida. So that experience I have entrenched in my brain, and I think about that, and I try to, as a mentor, coach here, colleague here at Metric, share those experiences and put in people's perspectives of why it might seem so urgent, why the small thing might seem so urgent to the cruise lines, right? And I'm laughing because I'm also having a picture. We have Carter as a new sales associate of ours, and from time to time when we're trying to win new business and the project's urgent, he's throwing in boxes of MAPE or a tool set in the back of his Subaru, and he's driving down to Port of Miami on a Saturday to get that to the storekeeper there at the port. And that's just what we try to do to get things across the finish line sometimes, to make sure that people's experiences are good on board these cruise lines. So
that's interesting. Now that you mentioned it, because you came from the purchasing side, right? You came from procurement yourself before you were involved with Metric Marine. How does that do you remember how you used to shit test your own vendors and does that impact how you do things now?
Yeah. And again, I'm laughing because, gosh, I'll date myself here, but it was I was working with the cruise lines in the 2011, 12, 13 era. And, the process really hasn't changed, although the technology has. So, So when I remember sitting I'd come in the morning and I have a stack of RFQs from the ships. I would manage 1 to 2, 3 vessels. I also picked up quickly on it, so they would throw more on me. I would also be the one that dealt with accounting issues with vendors and approval of freight when it was over 10% of the value of the order. So I dealt with all that stuff. And I remember the vendors that would get back quickly, right, that had good pricing, and the ones that would show up in the office, come sit with you down in your cubicle, talk to you about your recent orders. Those extra things that they did went further with me. And when I translated over on the other side of the table, right, I run into them at industry events, and I'm friendly with a lot of them still, those vendors that I had before. And, like I said, it puts things in perspective. And I dealt a lot of internal communications at that time with the vessels and understanding what their pain points were, right? And at the end of the day, the open communication was really what was a value add when I was working with them, right? You might get hung up on an RFQ and a vendor might be struggling to get you the pricing or with their vendor, right? And so you just have to keep that communication with the vessel, like, hey, we're working on this. Like, it's a little bit of a struggle finding it, but we're working on it, right? And I remember that here at Metric too, and I instilled that in our team, right? Like, sometimes we're not going to be super fast because it might be a really hard item to find, but if we go the above and beyond to try to find that and availability, like, and we let the customer know that, right? Like, they're going to be more sympathetic with receiving that quote a few days later if we went that above and beyond extra mile for them to try to find it, right? It helps them because while we're working on that one RFQ for them, they've got a stack coming in from the ship, right? So I have nightmares of how many would come into when you're trying to keep up with it, and you're just moving on to the next one after, right? And I was dealing at that time with a lot of different areas on the ship, not just the engine and deck, right? And so learned a lot in my time there. So
no, it's good background. Are you familiar with EOS?
Yes.
Like the visionary integrator kind of like leadership model, and then level 10 kind of meetings and things like that.
Yes.
Like, I feel like you're like squarely into like the integrator side of things, where you got to like make the piece of the puzzle fit together. Like, if you were talking to someone who is more like a visionary trying to set like what could make the best kind of distribution company work, like what are some things you think that like folks get wrong or like they should like focus on when they're trying to set the vision of like how to make a distribution company like yours work?
Well, I think, the sales operational handoff, it's not just throwing it over the fence. You really have to integrate it into your core business, right? Like, a quote becomes a document instead of a promise sometimes. And you can't have that mentality. It's important to intertwine and everyone have a hand in the process, understand what the left hand and the right is doing, to the right hand. So I think, having that perspective and understanding your customers, right? Meeting them with where they're at. We talk about that a lot at Metric, right? In a world where automation and technology is evolving, right? Still meeting your customers with where they're at. And to do that, you have to understand them. You have to be having those tough conversations with them. And I think a lot of times, a lot goes right, but I think a lot of times we learn the most from when something doesn't go right and how we handle that. And that's what customers remember the most too, right? It's hard to have those difficult conversations, when you don't get it right, but it's a learning experience and for your team and for the customer, and having that open communication, and internally, making sure that, what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen again? And, I think that's the most important thing, I think, with distribution and what we do at Metric, and then what others may or may not be when they're thinking of their strategy for a distributor, like just, understanding, your customers and, making sure that customers don't feel that friction in their transactions, that you're doing the best job you can internally to be as proactive as opposed to reactive in your operations, and linking the sales and operations and customer experience together.
And to be clear, I mean, customer experience has always been discussed as something that's like pretty soft and pretty like, yeah, but we just want to sell stuff. So like, let's worry about that later. But like, information asymmetry is syncing like every day. Like, people can ask any kind of AI agent whatever they want, even just using Google. They can find someone exactly like you with the exact same products that has the exact same quote time. Like, it's not really about just like making customers feel warm and gushy. It's about getting the next sale. You don't want just one sale. You don't want just like a $2,000 sale. You want like $2,000 sales every month.
Yeah,
so, like,
exactly. Oh, yeah. And then that's the thing. It's like, yay, we got a new customer. We got one RFQ. And it's like, all right, well, we got to take the RFQ and we got to get it converted to an order. And then the real work begins, is like, okay, how do we get them to come back to us? Like, on-time delivery is a great metric, but for us, it's like win rate and RFQ volume. And like, how do we take that customer and drive it home with them to be one of their top vendors? How do we become one of their top vendors? How do we, go from 1 order to 10 orders? Okay, 10 orders to 20 orders. Like, we've seen a lot of growth in particular customers that, at Metric, it can take like a lead to a customer cycle can be anywhere from, a month to 2 years even, right?
Wow.
And then at that point, when you're onboarding these customers, keeping the volume up and getting in front of them and making sure they have consistently good experiences with us and building that consistency, Because again, the consistency plays into that historical data that lives forever in their system of when they go to place that order again, or that item comes up again from another ship that they need. Oh yeah, Metric. Okay, I see here in our system, we had a good order experience. We placed it last 3 times. Boom, they press a button. Consistency with that is important. And getting on that historical data. And again, by doing that is giving them a good first experience. And that coaching element that comes into play is making sure that they're sending us the right requests and not just for a catch-all for everything else, right? We want to train them on what we have on our shelves, what we can get to them quickly. Yeah. So there's a lot of goes into that.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I guess maybe one of the last things I'll ask about, because I think a lot of the time I talk about on the show about kind of like go to market, like how do you get in front of the customers? How do you have like less of a transactional relationship with customers? Like, because again, it's very fluid now. It's not like people can't find a better option anywhere. Like there's options all over the place. It seems like recently you guys have invested in CTrade. What was kind of the thing behind that?
So CTrade's been around, since the beginning, depending on time feels like, but the CTrade, we've often, in the past walked the show. I think back in the days when the previous owners had it, we had a booth, right? This year, what we did is we did a happy hour just right towards the end of the day, first day of CTrade, just a few blocks away from the venue. It was a really good touch point. It was casual. It was just a good face-to-face interaction, bringing together industry colleagues to, catch up, see each other. Being out at these events is important in entrenching ourselves in the industry. Not only builds relationships with our customers, but again, finding new vendors, people, like-minded companies like us, we lean on each other in this industry. It's very a friendly industry to work in as far as, helping each other out. So, but CTrade is a great event for us and getting in front of our customers. Although you could say, the cruise lines are always in our backyards, but again, seeing industry colleagues coming in from different parts of the world and getting that time with them casually. I mean, again, it goes back to, it can be very transactional business, but we want to be the people too that they feel like they can pick up the phone and call when something doesn't go right and they need to lean on somebody to make that last mile delivery or item that they really can't find, right? We want to be those go-to people and help them solve those real world problems that they have. And part of that becomes, again, being human and maintaining those, relationships in person. And so, CTrade was a big success for us this year, in getting our name out there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the more time I spend in business, the more I think like it's less valuable to have the ability to like put the pressure on someone to close than it is to just be able to actually take away business from your mind totally and just be able to have a relationship with the customer outside of anything they could do for you. So like opportunities like that are pretty good because you don't really need to sell them anything. You could just like get to know them and they could be a voice to learn about things that you guys aren't doing that well or things that they might need in the future or just like what are their problems right now? Even if there's nothing you can do to solve it today, maybe in the future you could. So there's kind of a benefit in like removing the sales hat and just being a person and having scenarios that are not so intent based, like sequence number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Now it's a phone call. Hello, have you seen my email? Like it's just to be a little bit less, less of a brick robot and more just kind of like, all right, yeah, we get it. We're all in this business, but like, let's just have a drink. Let's look at the new toys in the industry. Like, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, and like I said earlier, like sometimes the complaints or the feedback sometimes is the best learning opportunity for us, right? And they'll remember that, right? Like that you lent an ear and you heard them. I mean, especially when you come back and be like, hey, remember when you told me about that Perfoni product you're having a hard time? Like, guess what? Like, we actually have that on our site now. And like, if your team needs that item, like it's there, right? Like they appreciate that. And, while some people might say, the old ways of like doing business, going out to lunch, all this stuff, I hear them. I know that a lot can go through an email campaign, but if you're like me, sometimes I'm just like deleting stuff out of my inbox and moving things over and trying to get to who's yelling, not yelling loudest, but like who I need to talk with, I think there's still a lot to be said of seeing people in person and valuing those relationships and, you pay it forward. In my career, like I met a lot of great people. I worked for a lot of great companies. And so that's helped me in bringing those relationships over to Metric even, people remember people who, did the right thing and helped out and was just a good person and good vibe to be around. And I think that's what we're building here at Metric is we're people who people want to be around, and not for just getting the best price or the fastest quote, but because again, we'll pick up the phone and we'll be there, So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said in this world today of that being a value still. And I lean into that pretty hard here. So, I mean, we were just at a golf tournament too, Maine Maritime golf tournament. And last year, I remember we grabbed a new customer out of it. We're just, golfing, hanging out, talking, right? I've got a friend who sails on board one of their ships and, so-and-so, yep. And then, and that value add right there, that right there builds the trust automatically, by, name dropping someone you might know, it automatically, that trust starts building.
By the way, I bet you didn't go to that golf spot and think like, okay, today we're going to land $20,000 of work.
No.
I bet you didn't have some master plan. You just showed up and just played some golf just for yourself, really nice. Right?
Yeah, no. It's really just nice. Yeah. The biggest thing, I'm always joking with the guys like, hey, do you guys want to get out of the office and get out in the elements, have a beer in the afternoon and, get some time away? And then everyone's like, yeah. And to your point, no one's like, yeah, I think I'm going to land a big PO today on the golf. But it's just again, being human. And, I happen to love being athletic and being outside. So it's always a plus on that. And, just getting to catch up with colleagues. And it's fun to do business too with, with people, right? Like it just makes your day better. Listen, at the end of the day, we're all here. And, the most important things to us is our health, our families, and, doing the work. It just is a little bit made easier when you enjoy the people you work around and work with. So, yeah.
Beautiful point to end on. Well, Jessica Stahl, I really appreciate your time. This is awesome. If people want to get in touch with you, what would be a good way to do that?
Well, my Metric Marine email address. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me. Hit us up on metricmarine.com too. Check out our page and our Amazon storefront. But yeah, I'm always reachable by email or phone. And especially to anybody who's interested in the industry or anything and everything Maine Maritime, I'm always around.
I'll drop that. Thanks, Jess.
Appreciate it, Brian.